All right. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. Tonight, it's just me, your host, Jeremiah Pricer, and John Einrenhofer. Mike is out, I don't know, he's jerking it or something, anime porn. I don't know what he's doing. But he will not be with us tonight. So how you doing, John?
Good to be here, Jeremiah.
Yeah, always good to talk boxing with you, John. And I suppose, because I don't host this show regularly, I might as well touch on a few things before we get going. Obviously, we're brought to you by BetNow. Sign up, all that good stuff. I forget what the deal is, but enter Truth50 as the promo code. You get some goodies. Also, we're brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation. Boxers, it's a rough sport. A lot of these guys don't have any 401ks. So, the best they can do is these independent organizations gather money for them and give them a little bit and ease their pain. All right, so we're going to start with not last weekend's action, but the action before that, because John wasn't here to analyze some of those fights with us, and I'd love to hear his opinion on some of these. But we're going to start with a little bit lower on the order here, and we're going to talk about we're going to start with Luis Nery versus Payano. That's one I've been wanting to get your opinion on since it happened, because I thought it was an interesting fight. It's not, it's not as if Payano is a bad operator. He's shown that he's a quality guy. I mean, he was tough with Rasheed Warren. I believe that first fight was a draw. He ended up losing clear enough in the rematch, but he's got a good amateur experience. He's a pretty crafty southpaw. Besides the Inoue fight, he showed an ability to last a distance. Nery, to me, looked big, as he always does at 118, and I thought, because it's funny, I remember you saying that you had a little fear if Luis Nery missed the weight, and sure enough, he did, by half a pound, and then he showed up, and my assessment was this. Initially, I think through the first 4 rounds, it looked as if Luis Nery was like maybe it had caught up to him. He looked slow. He wasn't throwing a whole lot of punches, but it seemed to me as if he was just kind of biding his time, being methodical, started to pick it up in the second half of the fight. Once he started throwing punches, he was obviously breaking his man down. You could see Payano slowly fading, and I thought he did a pretty good job of getting him out of there. And the body shot itself was pretty good, looked pretty devastating. What was your assessment of the fight?
I think that was a good assessment, Jeremiah, by you. I think, I did have that reservation going in, with Nery, with the conditioning, and he did miss the weight, then he made it, but that's the type of thing with him you don't like to see. There's certain guys you're always watching for that more, and he's definitely one of them in the sport. And I think, just as you analyzed, I think it just did lead to Payano being able to hang in there a little bit better than if Nery would have been in top shape. But I think you also analyzed correctly. Nery's got a lot of positives. In the politics of the sport, with all the promotional and TV divides, and frankly, let's face it, with too many weight classes where you can always lose a big fight by this weight jumping too that you and I both hate. With all that said, one of your dream fights in the sport at this point would be Nery and Inoue, but I just don't know if because of all those factors we're going to get it. But I think you're right. Nery in the end, as a lot of times a fighter of his quality will, even if he's not in his best shape, he'll gather himself, and just because of the talent gap, still get somebody out of there. And that's kind of what you like watching about guys like that. And that's what he did, because, you could see that body shot on Payano was totally legit. I mean, he caught him with a big shot, and Nery's a big puncher. So, that it still was a good finish. But Payano was able to hang in there just a little bit better than I thought going in, and that probably was in a part because of Nery's conditioning.
Yeah, and I actually thought that the commentators were pretty spot on in their assessment, actually all the way through. It's not often that I agree with that, but they were pointing out that Payano has a tendency to be a little bit trickier against southpaws, and that might be the case. I mean, after all, he was pretty tough against Rasheed Warren. He was able to hang in there against Nery, but then again, if Nery had unloaded early, he probably gets him out of there earlier. And I just want your opinion on this, because To me, I think the Ring magazine made a mistake in, crowning Inoue their, ring belt holder, in allowing Rodriguez to, at their number 3 position, to obtain that status. I am of the opinion that Nery is fairly clearly the biggest threat to Inoue at 118. And I saw a lot of people tweeting afterwards that, Inoue blows him away. And maybe that's so. Maybe Inoue is that good. But to me, at 118, Nery is a really big guy. Inoue has been moving up in weight. Nery is a southpaw. He's a legitimate puncher. And I think a lot of people are taking out of the fight that Nery was getting tagged a little bit. I think that's understandable. But to me, Nery doesn't fight in a similar manner if he takes on Inoue. I think he's probably a bit more aggressive, and it may turn into a firefight. But I just want to know if you think that he's still the biggest threat to Inoue in the division.
Oh, yeah, I think by far, and I think you're right. I have mixed emotions about what the Ring's doing there because, without losing standards, I think in one sense you want to get some of these Ring or lineal type belts or even transnational filled, but you don't want to lose standards, and that's where it gets tricky. And I think you're right. I think they gave I think there was a little bit too much of a slant to some of these tournaments that were on DAZN, turning into Ring belts. I think that they're overvaluing those tournaments, and I think Ring's got to watch that there with the conflict that you have to watch manifesting itself, which most of the times it doesn't. But Golden Boy's highly tied in with the zone, so when you had Ring belts popping up with Callum Smith and Groves, and then with Rodriguez and Inoue, it's a little bit of a slippery slope there that we've got to watch. But on the other hand, I think the way things have gotten, I think maybe transnationals only 1 against 2 stance. Well, admirable might be a little too strong. I think there could be some 1 versus 3 instances where it would be warranted, but I think those 2, it probably wasn't. But then getting back to that matchup, yeah, I don't see Inoue blowing away Nery. I wouldn't agree with that. People that have that thought, Nery's too big of a puncher, and Inoue so far, even though he blows guys away, you can see a lot of skill that he's done it with as well. But why I say that is that he's going to know that going into he can walk through these guys like Rodriguez and Jamie McDonnell, even though those guys are decent fighters. You don't go into with a guy like Louis Nery and you're just going to start opening up on him and not worry about what's coming back at you. So I think that changes the complexion of that fight right there. If it were to ever happen, doesn't mean Inoue might win, but he's not going to be just blasting away and walking through a guy like that. I think, like you said, he'd probably avoid a firefight with a guy like that, so that might change the complexion of, how he fights him. So I don't think that would be something that you would just bank on him blowing away. And yeah, I think there's still a long way to go, but I think you make a point about the commentary too. It did seem to some degree, at least, some of the Fox commentaries getting a little bit better for whatever reason. There's still plenty of flaws, but some of that production and some of that commentary, you are feeling a little bit more rhythm and a little bit more improvement there, and some better points are coming out.
Yeah. What was the one guy? Wasn't he on that telecast? Who was it? Albert?
Kenny Albert. I've always liked. I think Kenny Albert.
I liked him.
I like him better than Myers. I agree. I like Kenny Albert even with NFL and stuff. I don't. It's funny because he's a legacy in the sense he's Marv Albert's son, who was a legendary, boxing commentator on NBC all these years, and PBC even used him when they made the comeback. And Marv Albert's on NFL. Of course, he's most famous probably for NBA. But why I'm just tying all that in is I always think Kenny Albert's been good because you'd almost think it'd be the opposite because he's a legacy, but he never makes it about himself. You know what I mean? Like he's there. He does a solid job. Kenny Albert always knows you're not tuning in to watch Kenny Albert. You're tuning in to watch the fight or the game, and he's just there to do a solid job. I think he's very underrated and good. So I'm glad he's turned up on boxing, even if they did it maybe because it's Marv Albert's son, because I like him. I like his style, and yeah, I agree. He'd be a good guy to keep on there because He doesn't make it about himself. He's got a good solid voice, and he doesn't make it about himself. So yeah, I like when he's on there.
Yeah, me too. One thing I noticed is what I really liked about his style was he stayed in his lane. He wasn't trying to, tell you what's going on. He didn't act like he knew things that he didn't. He wasn't asking dumb questions or being a hype guy. I thought he was rock solid. So I hope they bring him on too. But I'm going to move on to the Lipinets fight just briefly because I think both you and I like Lipinets, and I know he's fighting a late replacement, and I can't remember his name, Jason Limson or something like that. Anyways, what do you think of the performance?
Yeah, it was good because late replacement. You knew it was going to be a mismatch, but again, my standard on those, which Lipinets passed, when you're in that situation, then do what you have to do, which is. It's a late replacement. It's a mismatch. Don't let him hang around. Look impressive and get the knockout. And, Lipinets landed a big left hook. And, Lipinets does have good power and a good victory for him. Lipinets really, heck, he's only got the one loss to Mikey Garcia. And I think people need to keep that in the back of their mind because, Mikey Garcia's only losses to Errol Spence. And I'm just saying that, then people tend to write him off at welterweight and everything. But Lipinets is looking good at welterweight. Of course, he beat, Lamont Peterson in a fight of the year, arguably a fight of the year, or at least a fight of the year candidate. And, dispatched this mismatched opponent, but looked good doing it with a good power shot. And, he's a formidable opponent. And I don't think it matters that the fight with Mikey Garcia happened at 140 instead of 147. I mean, they're both guys moving up. So, I just think it almost speaks well of both guys. I mean, it might give you a little bit of an indication of how good Errol Spence is. And these are all PBC guys. We know PBC's got all these welterweight guys, and they've got a lot of matchups. We know Terrence Crawford's an excellent fighter, and he's out there. But, from a business perspective, I just don't think, with all the guys that Al Heyman and PBC has, and they're really running it hard on Fox, and Fox has obviously got an investment in this now. You can't blame them for having their own guys fight each other. They've got so many matchups, which we just saw a lot of these guys appearing on the card we're talking about. But I think that's going to continue because you got Spence Porter card coming up in the fall, and you really almost can't blame them because there's plenty of fights there for those guys to make. And I mention that because I think Lipinets is performing well enough that he's going to be right in that mix. And there could be guys in the fall, some of these big PBC welterweights, not named Porter and Spence who are fighting that might be available for Lipinets. So it's a lot of good opportunities for him.
Yeah, maybe somebody like Danny Garcia. And I mean, speaking of PBC welterweights, I mean, we had another one on the card, and we had Ugas versus Figueroa, and this was a fun fight for me. I mean, I said beforehand, I've said a few times, I've never really been a big fan of Omar Figueroa. He just lacks dedication. You can see in the ring he lacks dedication with the slight flab that's hanging over his belt protector. Everybody, the commentators were talking about how his sister got him in shape and she's a nutritionist and yada, yada, yada. The guy's just fighting a traditional division too high. I mean, to me, he should be at 135 where he can exploit some of his, naturally, his natural tendencies, like his size. He was big at 135. His work rate is excellent at 135. His power is significantly better at 135. To me, again, he just lacks dedication. That's why he's been fighting, not regularly, and now it was exploited. I was hoping it would do so again. I don't like Figueroa that much. It has nothing to do with his personality per se. Again, he's just not taking a sport that's very serious, as we'll talk about later. He's not taking it serious enough. But he was outboxed. The entire way through. I'm not sure if Figueroa won a round here. Ugas looked bigger. He kept timing him with those uppercuts. His jab was working nicely. Figueroa just didn't seem to have any answers, and he just kept doing the same thing over and over again, hoping to land something big. But, His clean punches were few and far in between, and Ugas just ran away with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've liked Figueroa's talent, as I've said before, but you make a good point. He's a guy who, and that reminds you of an Adrian Broner, really. And could be for money reasons like Broner. Guys do like magnets, and that part you can't blame them. They go to where more money is, and there's much more money in the welterweight division. Adrian Broner went after it, didn't work. Work from ratings and getting some money, but not in terms of maximizing his career. And Omar Figueroa could be considered something similar there. Because, at 135, he was looking real sharp and his power was more significant. He's up and down with his conditioning. I thought he was in, good shape against Ricky Burns. When he beat him, he was in good shape against Robert Guerrero and blew him away, looked sharp. And then there was a lot of fights he was out of shape. Even though he beat John Molina, I didn't think he was in shape for John Molina. And, here was a fight that I was always looking for the in-shape Figueroa. I even think in this one, even though he lost and Ugas clearly won it, I do think this was the in-shape Figueroa. But I think that it does come down to what you pointed out, Jeremiah, that even though I, take the in-shape Figueroa seriously, and he did hang him there. He went to 12 rounds. But it is probably a good, almost like fable to tell with two different stories between him and Ugas, because Ugas is a guy who, in the modern era of the sport where you don't get fighters fighting as tough opposition and as often, I mean, Ugas really went on a great run, and he's still on it because the only loss he's got is the controversial loss to Porter. And you look back, he knocked out Bryant Perella, who was undefeated. Perella's just coming off a big win. He's the only loss for Jamal James. And Jamal James has been on a great streak of his own. He had a fight of the year type candidate with Thomas Delorme that he pulled out and won. The guys, he's beaten Figueroa. Figueroa was still undefeated though going into this fight, and Ugas clearly won it. I thought Figueroa was competitive because he was in shape, but Ugas hurt him literally right almost at the opening bell, and it was kind of all downhill for Figueroa. When you're up and down like Figueroa is, as you mentioned, and being inactive, it's hard then to fight a guy, to Ugas's credit, who has been active, has been sharp, and has been on a great streak. You just can't, against a guy that's that competitive, you just can't all of a sudden crank it up. Figueroa is good, but he's not that good where, he can just crank it up and be ready to handle a guy like Ugas with all the inactivity Figueroa's had and the other out of the ring problems. It just wasn't enough. It caught up to him in that sense, considering who he was fighting. And Ugas, Ugas also knocked out Ray Robinson. Robinson now has had to draw with Kavaliauskas and Kelly. So Ugas is really, in the modern era of the sport, he's on a great run, because a lot of people thought he beat Porter. I thought he didn't do quite enough, even though I like him, but there's plenty of people that disagree, and either it was certainly a close fight no matter how you looked at it. So guy's been on a great run, and if Errol Spence beats Sean Porter like we would assume, he's going to be looking for an opponent after that. I got a feeling he'll eventually get Pacquiao, but not maybe just yet. And Ugas is there, maybe he gets that call, and he certainly earned it. And there would be worse guys to see fight Errol Spence than your Dennis Ugas.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I actually had the feeling that Ugas might have been able to stop Figueroa if he turned it up just a little bit more. I thought, he kept getting flack from the referee, and I thought for holding. I do want to see guys broken up, and I want to see the action sustained. But Figueroa's style, he makes it tough. He really does, because I've been in with guys like that, and when they're constantly boring in, sometimes it's hard to sidestep them or something, especially when they come right at you. So the ref was a little intrusive, but I thought Ugas probably could have stopped Figueroa if he wanted to, but it seemed like, what was it, the last 3-4 rounds? I think it was the last 3. He just kind of took his foot off the gas and was like, hey, I've got this in the bag. Might as well coast to the finish line. I had to blame him, because it seemed like it was getting a little hairy in Figueroa's corner about round 7 and 8.
Yeah, I mean, and Figueroa, he doesn't have as much power, at welterweight 147 that he does at a lightweight, but he's still got solid power. So he's not a guy that presents no danger. And Ugas is one of the rare guys who has gotten somewhat as better as a puncher. You always look for that and hope that, but usually you don't see that with fighters. It usually just doesn't happen at the professional level. He has gotten a bit better, but he's still not, a natural puncher or a puncher by nature. So, yeah, for him to turn it up and look for a stoppage, he's a guy that's not really in his nature. I think what's a benefit for him, because it is an improvement with him, is, like he hurt Figueroa in the first round. He was able to stop a guy like Robinson, stop a Perella. He dropped Delorme. Even though Delorme doesn't have the greatest chin, I mean that's like an improvement for an Ugas. You look at earlier in his career, he wasn't punching with much authority against anybody that was decent. So he's made some improvement there, but not enough to be going out looking for stoppages.
Right. And before we go to the headliner of the card, I want to touch on a few more fights. I want to go to the Dillian Whyte, Oscar Rivas fight, because it wasn't that exciting. I mean, I think the feeling for a lot of people was if he could land some punches, he could draw Whyte into a firefight. Maybe in that Rivas would be able to catch him. And, both you and I thought that Rivas had a rock-solid chance of scoring the upset here. But to Whyte's credit, other than the round he got knocked down in and caught a sneaky uppercut, he was pretty dominant here. I mean, he stuck behind the jab, used lateral movements. To Rivas's credit, he was able to move his head. I mean, he was pretty slick. I mean, he didn't really get out of the way of the jab that well. But in terms of power shots, he was able to, duck, dodge, dip, and, just get out of the way of the power shots. It was just the jab that really gave him a lot of trouble. He was kind of plodding forward. Really looked like he was out of ideas, except when he finally scored the knockdown. But I thought it was a pretty solid performance from Whyte. I mean, it wasn't what I was expecting. Again, I didn't expect him to box and move and just make it a bit easier on himself, but he did.
Yeah, I actually did think it was a good fight. I ended up thinking it was a pretty entertaining heavyweight fight. In some ways, it went the way I thought because Rivas just about knocked him out, and I think I thought going in Whyte was a knockout loss waiting to happen, and my mind wasn't changed. But before we get into the PED issue, because you can't ignore it,
right?
But before we'll get into that a little bit. But before we get into it, let's get back to that date, July 20th, when I just watched the fight and the PED specter wasn't out there. I did see it the way you did, that even though I'm still not really sold on Whyte's overall abilities, in terms of just fighting skill, if you want to use that word with Whyte, I do think he's making the most of what he has. He did use that jab pretty effectively, and that's a lot of improvement for him, a real lot. And he's made some improvements. A lot of times I'll have problems with the British commentators on these fights. Frankly, just being biased, I just don't think you can put it any other way because they are. I do not think they had a bad outing in the Rivas-Whyte fight like I've seen, with the different British platforms. It's not just one, but I thought they were making some good points in this fight. Why I'm getting to that is one thing I did agree with them completely, that I thought it was one of the keys to the fight, and it wasn't really in that sense something Whyte was doing, but it's just Rivas. He does some good things in there, but you saw the way he threw that right hand, and it was just odd, and awkward the way
it was off.
It was just off, and he could not. Yeah, he just could not be effective with it. And I was thinking, Rivas, for a modern heavyweight, relatively short, and I thought about, it made me, frankly, you appreciate then a guy actually like a Mike Tyson, or like a Joe Frazier, Marciano, these guys. Why I say that is that, those were shorter guys, and there would be moments because they had to deal with taller guys that they would not as bad as Rivas, but they would have that wildish looking overhand right in their arsenal, but they would also have all kinds of different other ways of throwing their right hand. Okay, in other words, that was effective, and you just didn't see that with Rivas, and that was what was frustrating watching him, because he kept relying on that, and it was wild, and there wasn't, he just didn't have much punch variety, and it hurt him, because the fight was there for him a lot of times, and I did think in the end, again, this is where you differ with the commentators. I mean, there was 115, 112 on two cards. I think that was about right when you're considering that Rivas scored a knockdown. It could have almost been a bit closer. Oh, and that's right. And we get back to it. There was a bogus point deduction, wasn't there, at the end? The British refs jumping into the action. And how many times have we seen that recently? Didn't they take a point, or am I thinking of the Jennings? Didn't he take a point away from Rivas, like the Jennings?
Did they?
Joyce, or I'm just thinking of the Jennings Joyce fight and getting it mixed up for a second.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I don't recall a point deduction.
It might not have been. I might be thinking of the Jennings Joyce, but I thought maybe the 115, 112, or well, I don't know. Didn't he take a point away from Rivas for something late in the fight? Maybe it wasn't both of those fights, but that's troubling me with the British refs coming in, to the road guy and deducting, coming out of nowhere, deducting points. At least well, we know that happened in the Jennings Joyce fight, but that's stuff like that, or the referee injecting himself. But I thought White won the fight, but I did think it. In the end, it ended up being a close fight, even though Rivas had to, rally some there. But one thing I really did think this at the time of the fight, and I was not thinking PEDs during the fight. I mean, I didn't connect the dots, but I was thinking this during the fight. You saw how White had the gut, and he almost got knocked out in the last round against Parker. There's times when you've seen him get tired. As I was watching that fight, and like you said about White working the jab, and he was working it well, and he was throwing a lot of punches, but looking at his gut, and he weighed in at well over 260. As I was watching the
I thought
fight,
he was 257.
Okay. As I was watching the fight, I was literally thinking during it, let's say in the first 6 rounds, I thought White's going to gas out here. He can't keep this punch output going. Unless he really beats Rivas up that bad, which he didn't quite do. He didn't drop him or anything. I thought, he may just be out of gas at the end of this fight. And, even though he got dropped in the 8th and he was in serious trouble, but I got to say he came back throwing punches quickly. You saw that. And I thought, as the bell rang for the 12th round, I thought, man, I don't know how White, with that gut and the shape he was in, how he kept that punch rate up for the whole 12 rounds. And I wasn't thinking PEDs. I thought I got to give him credit for that. And then we heard later on about the PED news.
Maybe he gave himself a little extra credit, if you know what I mean.
I then thought that later, because I did think it during the fight, and I didn't connect it to a PED issue or anything, because you got testing and stuff, and I just thought. Well, White, I don't know how he did it, but I was thinking around round 6, I said White's going to gas out here, for heavyweights. He's just going at a high punch rate, and Rivas isn't really getting that beat up, and as long as he keeps coming, White might be in trouble. And he got dropped, but he came right back. I'll give him that. I mean, he came right back. He was firing back, and he fired back the rest of the way. And at the time, I said, I don't know how he did it. I got to give him credit. I thought for sure he'd gas out, but then with the PED news, I thought, well, that might explain it, because his punch rate was awfully high for what he looked like.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. I didn't make any sort of connection to PEDs, though. Again, I assume just about all these guys are doing it anyways. I just think a lot of the guys at the top level are being protected. I don't want to make a big deal about this, but I look at Anthony Joshua and I'm like, that dude looks like a science experiment. But anyways. I thought I had much of the same thoughts. I mean, I was like, man, he comes in at 257. You saw the way he was against Parker and others, and was under the same impression. I mean, Rivas, though I did think Rivas wasn't applying enough pressure to him to get the job done. But, watching Rivas against Jennings, I'm like, maybe he'll have enough in the gas tank. But I suppose I will say that White did do a decent job of banging to the body, so that could have taken some of the wind out of Oscar Rivas' sail as well. But, this whole PED thing with Dillian White, it's ongoing, and initially I had stated that, hey, I get why, right? I understand why he was he had the green light to go ahead and fight, because here's the thing is, when it comes to the Olympics, and they have, they've got a strict policy saying that, you have to know, they've got this biological passport thing, and, it tracks your blood, and, if you get flagged, they have to send it to 3 people, and all 3 of these experts have to agree that there's no other explanation for those results except for doping. And, this is why they allow things like, for you to test at a 4-to-1, epitestosterone to testosterone ratio, when that's, much greater than the 1-to-1 that an average person has, because, they want to make sure that all their bases are covered. And another reason why the Olympics do it, and WADA, the drug testing agency, is because they don't want to get sued. Because if they come at you and they say, hey, you've been doping, and we're talking about, a good number of athletes who are multimillionaires, they're going to have their lawyers throw the book at you, and you have to be absolutely sure that they're doping, or else you're going to get, WADA itself, is like, they're the ones putting together the banned substances lists, and, people are following their protocol. This is pretty much the top dog, but they've only got an annual budget of about $25 million. So if you had, 5 athletes who were accused of doping, and, these guys get you in court cases, WADA's not going to be doing that well. Especially if they lose 3 of them or something. You know what I mean? So they're very cautious about making sure that guys are absolutely doping before they convince. That's why that's why the vast majority of guys get away with it. Not only because they don't care, but just because of they're working within the limits. So I understood why UKAD would say, hey, these are, small doses, everything's okay. Maybe there's an alternative explanation. But I don't have enough facts to, condemn him. But I will say that it seems as if it's the right thing to do to scrap the fight altogether, because we see what's going on right now. And I'm not saying things are shady, but there's a lot that we're being kept in the dark about. It's like some people didn't know whether or not he was also doing VADA testing, or, when the tests are, or who's doing what and when and where. And the fact that Oscar Rivas doesn't seem as if he was notified before the fight, puts, a red flag goes up there too, because you want to have both parties notified. If I knew the guy that I was fighting was doping on even a minute level, there's a concern there, because anybody who has a working knowledge of PEDs knows that a lot of these guys are not taking big volumes all the time. A lot of these guys are what you call microdosing, and they're just they're doing it in small doses, so it doesn't set off any red flags with people who are doing the testing themselves. So initially I had thought, I get it. They don't want to be sued. They don't want to be caught on this sort of stuff, due process and whatnot. But another part of me, and I think I err on this side after thinking about it a little bit, is that you should probably scrap the fight altogether. It's just, even if a guy is doping just a little bit, there's still a cause for concern there. But I don't know. What do you think, John?
All right. Yeah, I think it was outrageous, and I think that the way the way it happened is just, what you said is for some, to me, absolutely unknown reason, that this was the UKAD rule that the fight can go forward, which, for professional boxing, to me, it's insane. This is not, track and field. It's not cycling. It's not soccer.
Yeah, somebody can die.
Yeah, somebody can die. You're getting punched in the head. Unfortunately, it is a reality. It's not saying anything that's not true. I mean, one of the objectives in professional boxing, as brutal as it is to intentionally inflict brain injury on your opponent, because that's one way to win the fight. So you can't have in professional boxing a standard where a fight is going to go on when somebody has tested positive. You know, you could have a fight delayed. I don't think there would be then any legal liability. I think all you got to have is like the Nevada. You have the strict liability standard. And, you know, I was looking again this week, you know, Mike's pointed this out a lot when we've done the show together. And, you know, I knew what he was saying, and it's kind of a strict liability, but I thought it was taking it, you know, I think maybe sometimes taking the argument to a little extreme, but I think it's worth noting, you know, because you have collective bargaining agreement in place as well. The players actually have a union. You know, in the NFL, the PED standard in the collective bargaining agreement is strict liability, with the language that Mike has pulled out, the football language of, you know, you're responsible for anything you put into your body, which is kind of severe. Now, Nevada in essence has that anyway, because of strict liability. You know, if you have it in, they're not saying that, but they're just saying if you have it in you, you're going to be suspended anyway, which is, you know, what happened to Canelo with the clenbuterol thing, and it's a year, and then his got shortened. But that's a better standard where you're not letting the guy fight. I just don't see how in professional
right.
because the only part I believe Eddie Hearn and where Eddie Hearn's playing legalistic games, but he's not quote unquote lying there on this part. I think he's probably lying about other stuff or misleading, but I believe that, you know, the UKAD standard is the guy's allowed to fight. And so Hearn's just going with that. Now, this may sound corny, but I don't think it's corny in professional boxing. It's really not even corny with what the guy's job is. You know, even though Rivas is a co-promoted top-ranked guy at this point, you know, I was thinking of this week too. You know, Eddie Hearn's still the promoter of that fight, right? You know, none of us are disputing that. So, you know, even though Rivas is not his guy, he's the promoter. You know, when you're the lead promoter of the fight, to me, you know, you're promoting both guys in that fight. You go around, you know, you put both guys up on posters. You say this is who's fighting. You know, for him to have a positive test on White and he knows about it, and then to just let the fight go on. Now his defense is going to keep being that UKAD and the British Board of Boxing Control lets me do that, which I actually believe him there. But for those to be the British rules, you know, the people in the UK, it seemed like they almost be anecdotally like a half and half type thing. You know, half of them are defending the White, half of them are saying we're embarrassed that these were our standards. The half that's saying we're embarrassed that these are our standards are right. I mean, you know, I don't know how that was. I think, Jeremiah, you probably gave a history of what the rationale was, but to take the sport of professional boxing and have that was your legal standard in the UK is absolutely outrageous. And I think normally it would be sounding too high and mighty and things like that. But, you know, Hearn's the promoter of that fight. I mean, I don't see how that, you know, even with that the standard, I just don't see how that goes on there with, like you said, without Rivas being notified. You put a guy in to take punches to the head from a guy that's been doping. And White, let's face it, White's a repeat offender. You know, if this is true, which I think it is true, he won't even, you know, get his B sample tested. I mean, you know, the guy's done it before. He should, you know, so, you know, second-time offenders, they should be out for a real, real long time. So
the good thing, however, is, I was going to say that the good thing, however, is that if he does indeed, you know, it comes back. And the problem with this is, one of my biggest concern with this whole process is how long it takes. I mean, what did it take for, you know, Tyson Fury after the Christian Hammer fight, like 2 years before it got resolved? I mean, it's absurd that it takes that long. I mean, you know, just test the B sample and you know, get on with the day and you know, let justice be served. And that's the thing about Eddie Hearn, too, is if he knows that his guy is doping even minutely, maybe he should take a moral stand and not risk Rivas, because, I mean, imagine if Rivas had died. Imagine if we had three deaths in a short span like this.
It really could happen.
It could very well.
You delay the fight. I mean, if you're Hearn, you delay the fight. You're going to lose a little bit, but you at least delay the fight. And this is, I can say from a legal's perspective too, because when you get into civil situations and criminal situations, this is when people can often get confused too. Now, in the UK, this would actually be state action, so to speak. It's national action because it's Britain does this. They have the British Board of Boxing Control, but still, people get overly caught up in due process concerns in these types of situations, because even though Dillian Whyte has money at stake and this is his livelihood, we understand that, and it is very important to a person. Still, his freedom's not on the line. In other words, it's not a criminal due process concern. We're not adjudicating this A sample and B sample as to whether Dillian Whyte's going to go to prison for 10 years or something like that. Now, even though a suspension might be severe, that's not the case, and that can be done when the fight's already been delayed. In other words, there's no need for these long delays or these, we have to respect due process. He's not in a criminal situation where his freedom's being threatened or he's going to be going to jail for 15 years. It's a professional sporting event, the most dangerous sport, where, in other words, the safety concern would be on the other side for Rivas's safety. So, you would err on that side,
I mean,
not on the side of Dillian Whyte being allowed to fight. It's ridiculous, and probably worth pointing out too, Jeremiah, is what Hearn's thrown out there today as an attempted defense, but I think it fits with what you've alluded to on previous shows, and I've tried to look at the bright side that Vada was catching more guys, but, I'm not even saying this isn't true, but it really shows the flaws, is that, Hearn's now saying, well, there was a Vada test before this UKAD test that was clean and run right before the fight. Well, yeah, that's when Whyte probably got off the PEDs, or Vada didn't catch him because there's some flaw there. So it makes you wonder a little bit about Vada. Not saying anything corrupt or anything, but just that they're missing, that they may be missing things as well, and it's disturbing.
Well, isn't it part of the problem too? Is part of the problem, I think, as well, is how they're overlapping their tests. I mean, I'm still unsure about like when Vada tested him, and then when UKAD tested him, and then when Vada tested him again. I mean, but sometimes I think it's also bad because it seems as if Eddie Hearn is throwing that out there, like, hey, we did Vada testing, as kind of a way to cover his ass. And I'm like, okay, doing Vada testing is not even close to being some end all be all, right? I mean, because when like you just mentioned, okay, he was using in between the Vada tests. I mean, you can have PEDs that have very short shelf lives, or half-lives. I mean, I've heard that, what was it, when there was a whole Balco scandal with Victor Conti and Memo Heredia, I thought I remember Victor Conti talking about something called the Cream, which has something like a 4-hour half-life. I mean, if you're only testing, if you're testing once every month or something, guys are going to be able to beat the system. But that's the problem with PEDs in general, is that VADA, WADA, all of these places, it's all insufficient. VADA is doing a good job because their catch rate is higher than WADA's. It's higher than, well, the catch rate in the Olympics is like 1%. USADA's catch rate is like not even it's like a fraction of 1%. I mean, so in comparison, VADA is doing a damn good job, but people are not understanding the complexity of the issue, and I really think it's because there's no real appetite to catch these guys. And, like you talked about with sprinting, it's one thing if you're Usain Bolt and you're going from point A to point B. There's no physical altercations involved, right? Technically it's not that difficult of a sport. I get it. If you're a runner, you're like, oh, well, it's getting off the block and all this other stuff. Listen, in comparison to boxing, sprinting is a piece of cake. Okay, there's a lot more complexity in fighting a guy, especially at a high level, than there is running from point A to point B. So what I'm saying is there's not an appetite to catch drug cheats in the sporting world. We know this. I mean, look at have you seen the documentary Icarus yet? Icarus?
I haven't seen that one yet.
Okay. Go if you get some free time, watch that. I mean, it's about the Russian state-sponsored doping. I know we've talked about that too. I think in relation to Alexander Povetkin, Icarus utterly exposes it. But not only the Russian state-sponsored program, but initially the documentary was meant to set out and expose flaws in the system. And this is the point that Fogel, the guy who makes it, he actually made it on the Joe Rogan podcast, but. Just look at it. We're talking about Lance Armstrong, who beat something like 500 tests in his career, and they never caught him. Never. What does that say about the system itself? And it gets even worse on a level like boxing, because at least in the Olympics, you have things like the biological passport. And what I'm saying is there's some appetite to catch cheaters. It's very small. I mean, obviously, there's not a chance in hell that only 1% of Olympic athletes are doping. It's impossible, and I would go on record in saying a clear majority of them are using, because you see the kind of difference that PEDs can make. I mean, you look at who is the sprinter, the American sprinter, Ben Carson?
Ben Johnson, the Canadian.
Ben Jones?
Ben Johnson, the Canadian.
Ben Johnson, right.
Right.
Right, yeah. So I mean, he's juicing up to his eyeballs, and he gets caught, and then he runs this real fast time, and then he tries to do it naturally the next time out, and he looks like a regular guy in a field full of superstars. I mean, it clearly makes a difference. Again, I think a clear majority of them are using. I think the system is designed for guys to use, and it's worse at boxing because, again, you have things like biological passport for the Olympics. So this is a more complex system that we're using in boxing. But in boxing, people get way too caught up in the VADA stuff, in my opinion. I think VADA is doing the best job out there. But if you think only 3% of guys are, like they're catching all the cheaters, it's impossible. And this is what VADA even says. They put out statements every once in a while. They're saying, look at what's contracted in, okay, don't just pay attention that, there's a stamp of approval from us. Just because we're involved doesn't mean that there's not shortcomings. Because, again, look at it. When you overlap with UCAD, if you say, hey, I'm only going to do testing for a month leading up to the fight, if you say, hey, I only want this kind of test performed or this kind of test performed, and honestly, I would go so far as saying, VADA is doing the best job, but who knows if everybody in VADA is an upstanding individual. I mean, Margaret Goodman, the person who started it, I've heard great things about her. Maybe she is a real ethical person and, there's no cause of concern for her. But I think these guys are doing it on a voluntary basis. I don't think they're getting paid to do VADA testing. So some of the doctors and stuff, I mean, this is things to me are much more gray than they seem to be for a lot of other people, because I think we want to believe that all these athletes believe in fair play and stuff like that. And I think that's fantasy land. I really do. And it's not that I think everybody's a piece of crap for cheating, because I understand that argument too. I mean, if you had a kid and the difference between him running a 4.740 and a 4.440 is PEDs, and, the contracts are much bigger with him running a 4.4, I get it. I really do. I mean, I don't like cheating, but I understand what is going on underneath the surface, because it can result in millions of dollars in a difference. So, again, I understand all sides of this argument, but my thing with VADA, too, is don't put them on some pedestal as if they're all upstanding individuals and nothing can be done. I mean, this is what I was actually talking to my brother about. I mean, imagine if you're a manager of fighters or you're a promoter and you do VADA testing to make it seem as if your guy is clean, but you're dealing with a doctor who, let's say, a doctor who's doing the testing and he makes $100,000 a year, and you're a promoter. And let's say, hey, if you tip me off to when these VADA guys are coming, I'll pay you $50,000. So you're getting a 50% increase in your annual salary to just tip them off. I mean, and imagine other guys are doing that. I mean, you could make a ton of money as a tester doing some shady stuff. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I don't have the evidence to back that sort of stuff up. But I know, just go watch the documentary Icarus. There's a lot of cloud of lies that goes on with this stuff. So VADA, again, they're doing the best job out there, but it's just not enough. Unless you're doing random testing 24/7, 365, people should be suspicious that you're a doper. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of old. Well, some old school people think differently, but I'm old school in the sense that, yeah, I mean, I still don't believe in cheating. In all sports, I think that there's a school of thought, even somewhat older. Some old school would look at it like me, and then there's some old school that thinks it's part of all sports, all games. That the old, if you're not cheating, you're not trying stuff, and they take that mentality, and they take that mentality into the drugs. And as you pointed out, then you get in modern professional sports, you get a high financial incentive to do it. And as you pointed out with the Russians, and it is relevant to this issue because you could easily then extrapolate that to professional boxing, which is, with the Russian system, with their state-sponsored, I haven't seen the documentary, but read extensively on it and followed all the New York Times reports on it from the beginning, which, New York Times is still the standard, no matter what anybody wants to say in terms of, especially with international information. I know a lot of government officials actually do get their international information from that. But the point being that the Russians were using doctors. So in other words, it fits to what you're saying, Jeremiah, is, and that could then obviously happen with Lance Armstrong was using doctors as well. So in other words, if the Russians were doing it and Lance Armstrong was doing it, how hard would it be for a boxing promoter? And just like you said, I don't have any direct evidence of this or anything, but, to just have physicians that they employ who are going to help them do this stuff and think of how, but then you think of the danger in this sport. So I think it does also to tie into what we're going to talk about more, about some of these boxing safety issues, which, this is going to sound kind of funny, but I think it's probably an appropriate point to tie it in because this PEDs in professional boxing, the most dangerous of sports, is obviously a huge safety issue, whether people want to stick their head in the sand about it or not. I mean, if you've got a doped up guy who's got a big doping advantage and he's hitting you in the head with his doping advantage, he can literally kill you. He could kill you anyway, but he's got a greater chance of killing you. So it's a big safety issue, and boxing's got a lot of problems being considered the underbelly of the world of sports as it is. But I think where people are maybe sticking their head in the sand a little bit, as funny as this might sound, is, they're talking about, and I'm not saying these aren't good things, but, oxygen being available after fights, or, making sure we've got proper medical attention, in a certain sense, that's almost not dealing with the real issues in professional boxing now, because the professional boxing, one of the objectives has always been, to hit your opponent in the head and try to cause brain injury, okay? Nobody's talking about the rules of the sport changing there. So as long as that is going to be in the nature of professional boxing and in the rules, which as long as it's going to exist, it probably is going to be, people are going to be suffering repetitive head trauma, CTE, long-term damage, and as horrible as that is, that can't be avoided. That's not going to be avoided by oxygen at ringside or quicker medical attention. So, to me, even though it's not that those are bad things, you're almost sticking your head in the sand about the issue, because if a guy ends up getting quick oxygen or medical attention and he ends up in a lifelong coma instead of dying, it's not exactly making the sport safer, okay? So what I'm getting to is you got to talk about these things about the PED issues as well. You've got to talk about, frankly, about things about fighters just being taken care of. In other words, after they suffer these injuries, I think what really is becoming as morally reprehensible is that these guys, they never have been, and they're not being taken care of. There's only so many Pacquiaos or Mayweathers in terms of money, and they're very, very few, a minute percentage of all the guys who've ever fought. So, you've got guys doing this and getting this long-term damage and putting their life on the line and then not being taken care of afterward. That's something that's got to change.
Right. Yeah. So you're breaking up a little bit there, John. Just a little bit. Yeah. But yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's got to be some long-term investment in these guys' future. There's just a complete lack of it, and it's unfortunate because it's such a dangerous sport. And when we talk about some of the consequences that can happen, we saw with Maxim Dadashev. We saw with the how can I forget his name because I shared about it in the art. Yeah. I mean, we saw in quick succession what can actually happen, and admittedly the medical treatment for both was pretty night and day. I'm not saying it was spot on, absolutely fantastic in Dadashev's case, but in Santillan's case, it was pretty bad. It was I thought the handling of that was awful, but it was tough. I mean, it's when you watch a sport like this, you're kind of shaking hands with the devil because things like this are going to happen at some juncture, almost like a quarterback, throwing an interception. You just kind of put it out of your mind afterwards because this is a game where it happens. And with Dadashev, I mean, he did look pretty good in the fight. I mean, it's not as if he took a real good beating early on. I mean, he was pretty skillful. I mean, he was avoiding a lot of shots, but it was kind of like the Chavez Meldrick Taylor thing where it's like he kept catching up, but obviously this was more one-sided in my opinion than something like Chavez and Taylor. But it just reminded me of it a little bit because Dadashev was moving, he was using angles, he was using his jab, but he just kept getting caught, and then it just became progressively worse. And Buddy McGirt, it's a very touchy situation in there. I mean, it's hard to tell. Even after years and years of doing it, you can see that it's tough to tell when exactly to pull the plug. He did, and they did what they can. And with these sorts of surgeries, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, like you saw with Dadashev, I mean, he dies like the day after, or the day after that. I mean, it was real soon after. Some of these guys end up staying in comas. A lot of guys suffer severe, brain injuries, and they can never walk. Some end up being okay. But yeah, it's a very serious thing. But in the case of the Argentinian, it was worse because they were holding him up. I guess this is what I'd heard from an Argentinian source, so hopefully I'm enlightening a few fans out there. But I had heard that Santillan's father was holding him up, and I guess he was a fighter, as was his brother. So this is a family of fighters. Anybody who wants the video footage, his father was holding him up as they rendered the decision, and then they sat him down, and almost immediately he collapsed in the corner. Took him minutes to get him oxygen. It was, to me, that's not going to be as noteworthy because it wasn't on big TV, it wasn't on ESPN. But to me, that was a significantly scarier case. I mean, they both died, so, I don't want to separate them too much, but it was significantly scarier in the Argentinian's case because of the way it was handled. McGirt almost instantly recognized the danger that Dadashev was in. He pulled the plug, and then they got medical care. In the Argentinian's case, again, they held him up for minutes. They tried to sit him on a stool. He collapsed. The treatment was just slow, and he ended up dying soon after. But again, you hear this a lot. I don't mean to sound cliche, but it is a tragedy.
Yeah, I'm not saying, and here's what I'm kind of trying to be nuanced with it, where, I agree with you. Even in the Dadashev case, I'm not saying the treatment or the ringside actions where they tried to have him walk away. Was that good? No. In the case of, the Argentinian, Santillan, right, I saw the video you posted. I think when you posted, Jeremiah, it actually was when you posted, it was the first time I saw it, but I did watch it all then. And there's no doubt, I mean, they're trying to hold him up for the decision. He collapses while he's collapsing, and then he collapses. That's not a good thing. I mean, even though it's speculation and even an expert might have trouble telling you, you'd have to have a neurologist or a neurosurgeon testify to their opinion, looking at everything. If it would have been handled differently, would there be a chance they could have survived, or if those kind of standards were in place? I mean, maybe you'd have to talk to an expert, but I want to make sure that that's understood first. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or you shouldn't work on that, but what I had a little bit of trouble with from boxing people afterward, and unfortunately I've been following the sport long enough that I've been through, and they're always bad. I mean, they always stay just as bad, but being through these tragedies before, when you even see him, I've seen him on TV. Unfortunately, I was even at one live one time, had that misfortune, and of course you always feel for the fighter first, but getting back to my point is, I saw the way some boxing people were talking about, a lot of the people, on Twitter, writers, there was this initial reaction like, the problem was we've got to just put these safety measures in place. Like, in other words, that was the problem. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing or shouldn't be done, but in other words, like, that would make the sport okay. In other words, look at Dadashev's case. Again, I'm not a neurologist or a neurosurgeon, but, the guy had been taking those headshots. If they would have put him on a stretcher immediately, he still had traumatic brain injury from getting hit in the head repeatedly, for all those rounds, okay? Same thing with Santillan. If they acted immediately, it wasn't going to change that factor. It was just a matter of maybe if there would have been some chance for survival, and you can go far enough to say this, if they would have survived, what kind of lives would they have had, okay? So, in other words, to say that this was just a question of ringside safety measures is ignoring the problems with the sport. And I do agree with the people that say everybody's got to come to their own terms on that. But I think even though we go through this in the past, and unfortunately, as long as there's boxing, it'll happen again, I do think you have to look at it as sensibilities change in society and time goes on. Every time you have tragedies like this, the first question does have to still be, should there be boxing? Can we even justify this? And then I think in modern boxing, we've got this additional PED issue. In other words, was anything about the PED testing in Dadashev and Matias? I still haven't seen it discussed. And people would say, well, it's probably local commission stuff. It probably was, but we just had a guy die in the ring. I mean, shouldn't we be? I'm not saying anybody did anything, but I'm just saying, shouldn't that be one of the foremost points of investigation at this point? And nobody was talking about it. They're still not. So, same thing for Santillan. No discussion whatsoever.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, right, yeah, well, and I think people don't realize how complicated this is. And, again, it's not because a lot of fans are necessarily burying their head in the sand, but I think just a lot of people don't really want to get into the nuance. I mean, but of course that's what separates, guys like you and us from, the casual fans. I mean, it's not a problem per se. So, a lot of people don't want to be journalists and, do detective work. That's fine. I understand. But a lot of people don't get how serious this actually is because, if there was no drug testing for Dadashev, okay, but here's an example that I thought was really interesting, and I saw it on Rick Glazer's post a while back, and I saved it because I found it so interesting. And this was in relation to his post about, okay, so he said the biggest or the most weight he's ever seen a guy put on after the weigh-in is Gerald McClellan when he fought Julian Jackson the second time. And Rick Glazer contends that McClellan was 198 pounds going into that fight. That would be 38 pounds because that was a middleweight contest. It seems nigh impossible from, I wouldn't think that a guy could physically do that. And I don't know if that's right. I mean, maybe he is correct, but if he's even close to that, even if he's at 25, it still emphasizes the point in my opinion. So I saw somebody comment on there, and he seemed like he knew what he was talking about, because he said he had done some, might have to get him on the podcast, but he had done some like, neurological work, or did some seminar or something where they discussed it. And one of the examples that he used was this fight, this rematch between McClellan and Jackson. And actually, if you watch the pre-fight talk before the match ever starts, Bobby Chiz is actually commenting on McClellan's size a fair bit. And I think at one point he even says that he thought McClellan was 180 something. But this is what the guy said, and it relates to boxing, and it relates to other places that we're not paying attention to. So he said the fact that McClellan was essentially abusing PEDs. And that's what allowed him to retain, like balloons so much up in weight. And he said that his size, when he fought Julian Jackson the first time, the fact that he was so much better helped him take punches from Julian Jackson. Now, I think as an athlete, that makes some sense. You're like, hey, I come in a bit bigger, the punches aren't going to affect me as much. But what that also does is you could have a brain bleed, or something could be messed up inside your head, and you would not know it because of that, right? What he was saying is that McClellan was actually suffering from headaches, bad ones, even before he went into the Nigel Benn fight, which ultimately proved his undoing. And so the point is that if you're abusing PEDs and you're coming in huge the night of the fight, you may, kind of like headgear in amateurs, it may give you this false sense of security, and it may end up being your undoing. Do you see what I mean there, John?
Well, yeah, and even just the fact of, because they are illegal substances, at least for what they're used for, and I'm not accusing anybody, but just anybody that would be using them. I mean, you don't know what health effects negatively they're having on you, and when you are taking punches, like you mentioned, Jeremiah, who knows, what that reaction can be. And that's getting to, and McClellan is unfortunately a sad example. No, even if it just happened to him from, simply being in a tough fight with Ben and getting the permanent brain injuries, is that I also felt like what wasn't discussed enough after Dadashev and Santillan is, what I talked about a little bit before. The other thing that seems to me that ought to be discussed is, we know more about CTE than we knew 20 years ago. The term wasn't even around 20 years ago. So we know even if a guy's not going to die in the ring, that if he's taking repetitive headshots, I mean, that's going to, come up with long-term consequences later on. Even the old-timers had some, sense of that, where they used to talk about people being punch drunk and things like that. I mean, that goes back to the 40s, people talk like that. So, you could obviously then see it with people later on. You knew it, but now, there's more science behind it. So I think, you've got to come to your own terms as to whether, boxing should exist and you want to watch it. And I believe it or not, I would respect anybody's decision there as to what they want to think. But I think then second, you got to then say, okay, if we're going to have it, and guys are going to be allowed to take these risks, sort of knowingly take these risks, which, is probably how you have to justify it if it's going to continue. But then I think more's got to be discussed now than in the past. That I think, there really is becoming a moral question of, okay, so let's say you get through that first hurdle and you say these guys take the risk, they know what's going on. Other humans like us who want to follow and want to watch it, we can make our own decision, whether that's okay for us morally or not. Even if you pass those hurdles, I think now we're getting to a point with what we know. Can the sport be allowed to go on if these guys are not going to be taken care of? And I think that's where you're going to have a problem in the long, maybe even not that far in the long run.
Yeah, and I think
broadcasters are going to. This happened really after Mancini and Cam, and then things have crept back in a little. It's force the fans to pay more than they used to. It used to be supported by advertisers, and it's largely not now. But, broadcasters will pull out and things like that. In other words, so, if there's going to be broadcasters in, trying to get some of that money, from the promoters, they don't have to make as much. That's just the way it is. If we can, start to get some kind of structure where these guys get taken care of. But it's going to be hard to morally justify over the longer term from here on out. If, look, Bobby Chacon, he finished out what he was kicking around collecting cans. We've seen the footage of Rocky Lockeridge, and even though those guys ended up with other problems, I mean, are we gonna continually have that's the way it's going to end up for a lot of these people, and then continue with it? It's going to be tough to justify.
Yeah, and I think you also look at Bobby Chiz. I know there was a good article written about him too, and he's like bagging groceries and stuff.
ShopRite, in Jersey.
I think it makes it even tougher because there's no centralized governing body. I mean, it's just there's not a whole lot of control on the sport. So there's what do you do for PR? I mean, there's not a whole lot of there's not a PR guy, right? I mean, there's nobody really taking uniform actions to protect these guys. I mean, if I have a problem in this state, I'll just go to another state. I mean, it's a mess. And again, I think a governing body would go a ways. Of course, you'd like to have somebody ethical running it. Anyways, we're going to move on to the Manny Pacquiao, Keith Thurman headliner. And I think like most people, I was pretty happy about the way it turned out. I mean, we both predicted Keith Thurman to win. I think that was, rational, right? Manny Pacquiao's 40 years old. He started at 106 pounds. But it was a damn good fight. I mean, Keith Thurman, he didn't take Manny Pacquiao's shots that well. It seemed pretty clear that Manny Pacquiao was able to hurt him more than he was able to hurt Pacquiao. But there was a lot of good back-and-forth action. I mean, my problem with Keith Thurman, and I like the guy. I think he did a pretty good job of selling the fight. He's not as dull as somebody like Terrence Crawford. And, again, it's not that I don't mind guys who are like, hey, I'm just going to go do my job. I'm not going to say much. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. I just think that it's a nice change from time to time to listen to a guy like Keith Thurman sell the fight a little bit. Yeah, it can be corny at times, but, if Manny Pacquiao's not going to say much, I think it had something to it. I think the pay-per-view numbers did pretty good, actually. But Keith Thurman, to me, looked like he was struggling to find an identity in there. He would box some, he would brawl some. And I think that has worked just fine against guys like Danny Garcia and Sean Porter. I like the versatility, to be honest with you. And I was under the impression watching the fight that Keith Thurman should have just maintained an aggressive posture. I think at times he even displayed a pretty damn good jab. And it even reminded me of what Eric Morales did in the first fight against Manny Pacquiao, where he was just sticking it right in his face. He was landing straight right hands. Actually, he's pretty active whenever he decided to unload. But Manny Pacquiao, to me, was just a harder puncher. He looked like he can dictate when he wanted to dictate. And it was just a damn good performance. I thought the scorecards were pretty good. I didn't agree with the draw, but I thought it was close.
Yeah, I got to give credit to Pacquiao because I did think he won the fight, and I predicted Thurman going in, but I did think Pacquiao won it. I think you summed up the key of the fight for me, and which was what flipped it for me and ended up leading to the result, because it was still a pretty close fight, which was Pacquiao was able to hurt Thurman, and Thurman was not able to hurt Pacquiao, and I thought it was going to be the other way around. I think I always like to look, if I get a prediction wrong, I like to look at some of the reasons why, because I think that does help you for the future and makes you more accurate. And I think as the fight got close, and I'll say I said it on our show, I thought when the fight was signed, and if you look back at our old shows, you would hear this in tweets and things. I thought that right before it got signed that they'd make that fight because the way Thurman had looked not as good, and Pacquiao was looking good enough, in the Broner fight, that it was going to be close to an even money fight. I thought Thurman would still take it, but I could see where both guys would think they could win that fight, and the fight got put together, I think, largely for that reason. Pacquiao thought he could win, ended up being right, and Thurman thought he could win, and he was close enough, and he's the younger guy, so he should think that. But So it was competitive in that sense, but the thing that I think I got wrong, that I started to maybe rationalize a little bit as the fight got closer, and I talked about it as we were previewing the fight, was that Thurman was still hurting guys in some fights, and that Porter and Garcia had great chins, which they do, but he didn't hurt them. But that maybe there was still going to be enough of the old power to hurt Pacquiao, and there was not. So I think what I got wrong was the fact that what I had seen with Keith Thurman, that I was originally kind of thinking before this fight got close, was it seemed like to me, some people had traced it to different moments, but for me it was around that Bundu fight. He dropped him and he didn't follow up to finish. And, Bundu at this level is mediocre. And then, other fights, he wasn't putting that hurt on guys that he had been. He didn't follow up on Guerrero, let him go the distance. A lot of stuff like that with him. And, against a guy like Pacquiao, who, even though he came up from being a flyweight, has shown a good chin throughout his career on the whole. Thurman wasn't hurting him. He wasn't hurting him. And Pacquiao did hurt Thurman, but that still surprised me. That was not something that I really expected going in. And he hurt him with that body shot too. He dropped him solidly early and then hurt him with the body shot late badly, just like Collazo hurt Thurman with that body shot. But that was a bit of a surprise. And, Pacquiao, great performance. Thurman didn't perform bad, but he doesn't seem like that guy. I liked him too, and he just doesn't seem like he's going to be quite the guy that we thought coming up. He became more versatile, I'll give him that, but he was kind of like a big power KO guy coming up legitimately, and he was exciting to watch because of that, and you looked at his future potential, and that part of him looks to me now to have permanently faded away. And some people said injuries. That might be actually true. It might not be excuses. Maybe he has had injuries over the years he's not talking about as much that have just taken that out of him, but that doesn't seem to be there for him. Even as good as Pacquiao is, he's still 40 years old, and he clearly won the fight. So I don't know. I think Keith Thurman, he's still legit, even top 5 welterweight, but he's not going to be that top guy that he looked like he might be.
Yeah, so you're breaking up a little bit again, but
okay.
So what do you think? Where do you think Manny Pacquiao goes from here? Where should he go?
Initially, when the fight happened, I thought it might go right to Spence, because I thought that would be the PBC plan, for that to be a blockbuster and kind of I don't care about the belt stuff, but some people do, and the promoters perceive that people do. So kind of a combination of all the belts kind of thing. But now thinking about it more, and I did tweet this week because I really believe it. Just like I felt like I did call that Pacquiao-Thurman matchup right before it happened, that it made sense that they'd make it, and they did. I think now what makes sense for him is, I do believe Pacquiao, when he said he was straightforward post-fight, he said, I'm taking the rest of the year off. I give him credit for that, because he didn't dance around it or anything. He just said, no, that's it for me for the year. I've got other stuff to do, and the guy is 40. I believe him. So if he's not going to fight again this year, I was thinking, Mikey Garcia was going to be fighting Danny Garcia, and then that disappeared. And, I'm not saying there might not be reasons for that. That's fine. Like, in other words, so I'm thinking now, is Mikey Garcia pulling back to take the Pacquiao fight, or maybe he'll take a softer touch before the end of the year and then fight Pacquiao? Because that seems to me to almost be like a replay of the Pacquiao-Thurman matchup. In other words, Pacquiao's 40 going on 41, but he's going to look at Mikey Garcia against Spence, and the mere fact that Mikey Garcia's come up from 126 pounds and think, I can beat this guy. And Mikey Garcia is going to be the same thing. He's going to think, hey, I was one of the top guys in the sport, undefeated. I lost to Errol Spence, a big welterweight who's one of the top guys in the sport. That doesn't mean I can't bounce back and decisively beat Manny Pacquiao. In his mind, he's going to be thinking that. So, and they're both, for this era, of course, Pacquiao really is a guy that almost would fit in other eras like that. And Mikey Garcia, for this era, they're guys that are attractions. So you put them together, they're both with PBC. You would think a pay-per-view can do solid there, looking at both their numbers. And then if Pacquiao gets by that one, then he can fight Spence later on, even though he's not going to beat him. And it can be a big payday for both of them, assuming Spence gets by Porter. So that's kind of my guess right now how that might play out.
Yeah, that very well could be it. I mean, Pacquiao's got a ton of options because he's still going strong. I mean, the guy could fight anybody under the banner, and I think just about any of us would be excited to see it. I mean, but yeah, I mean, kudos to Manny Pacquiao. I mean, the dude's just a modern legend. But yeah, let's go to the weekend after. Again, Pacquiao is a bona fide legend.
I will agree with you there.
Competed.
Pacquiao's confirmed. He is a modern legend. You just with what the guy's achieved now to beat Thurman at the stage at 40. I've never seen that mind. I'm a 40-year-old welterweight, the guy coming up from the lower weights, and Thurman's a totally legit opponent. I mean, you just can't take it away.
Right. When you evaluate their resumes, Keith Thurman was obviously up there. I mean, his resume is clearly better than somebody like Terrence Crawford's. But yeah, we'll see where that goes and who Pacquiao gets and what exactly happens. But it's shaping up to be pretty nice. Anyways, the weekend after, we had Gervonta Davis versus Nunes. I don't know. There's not a whole lot to say here. Davis looks explosive. He's a very talented guy. Nunes, I wasn't really sure of who he was, but I've got to give it to Davis. Again, he's explosive. He's quick. I mean, he's got a lot going on. My only issue is the opposition. I mean, he's blowing the guys away. You got to give him credit for that. But he's fought one top 10 guy in Pedraza. I really need to see this guy step it up.
Yeah, we need to see him step it up. The credit you give him here is he blew a guy away, and we talk about the problems with like a Figueroa, and Davis had that one misstep against the Fonseca guy on the McGregor-Mayweather undercard where he was completely out of shape and missed the weight and looked terrible. And, he's a very young guy. He at least for now, he seems like he may have learned from that because 129, he was in shape. And it was a mismatch opponent with this Nunes guy who nobody knew and nobody will know from here on out. And then Davis just took care of business. I'd said it on his way up, said it on the show very early in his career. I do see the mini Tyson the mini Southpaw Tyson comparisons. I see that. I think that in his case that is legitimate. But anybody who's a force like that, like a physical force, and I've said this before, but I learned that reading, from Emmanuel Stewart's thoughts on things, 30 years ago, and you get a physical force guy like that. And it's not any fault of the guy, but it's just a style thing, where it's a lot of like moving forward and reflexes and power. Even a Joe Frazier, or heck, even though there's some differences, like a Marciano, where he's even though he's smaller for heavyweight, a physical force moving forward. These are short shelf life guys. Roy Jones Jr., with not the fundamentals, but a lot of reflexes and power and speed. The shelf life's not long. So, I think Davis has got I think not only for the fans about stepping up the opposition, I think because of his style. I mean, even though he's still a very young guy, 24 years old. I mean, young. He's got to get it. He's got to move. I mean, because I think with his type of style, he's a type of guy that even through no fault of his own, just because of style, he could be fading at 27 years old. You may have then seen the best of him. So I think he needs his big fights now, and that's what I think is kind of a shame because I think he's got the talent, and they're talking Gamboa. It seems to be set up for Gamboa before the end of the year. That's going to do nothing for him. He'll blow away Gamboa, right, and it'll just be meaningless. We've got the political divide where maybe he can't get Lomachenko, but I've said this before. I've seen one or two other Twitter people say it. To me, if he's going to take a fight before the end of the year, I mean, who cares about these alphabet belts and everything? I mean, Robert Easter's there. I mean, there's a big size differential. It'd be somewhat intriguing. I'm not saying Davis doesn't beat him and maybe knock him out, but give me something like that. On the road maybe to something, better. But the Gamboa thing is just not going to do anything for me.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I'd really like to see him fight Miguel Berchelt because they're number one and number two in the division. Again, you and I both don't like super/junior divisions, but they're 1 and 2. So at least if you're going to hang around there, at least create a champion in the process, and then worry about these other guys. But Tevin Farmer fought on the same night, and they asked him in an interview, "Hey, do you want to fight Davis?" And he was like, "Well, whenever Eddie Hearn makes an offer to Floyd Mayweather pretty much dismisses it." So I don't know what the plan is. I mean, like you said, Davis is an explosive guy, and I don't think he's got a long shelf life. So get on with it. I mean, I'm tired of seeing it. I will say that I do like that they're keeping him active. I don't like that he's fighting nobody of consequence there. He's fully capable of fighting any of these guys, and I know they're trying to keep him active so they can keep him at 130 because then he has less of an excuse, at least in the modern sense, of fighting some of these guys at 135. It's nonsense. I don't buy it. I hope they move on. He's a good fighter. I don't really have anything against him in particular. It's just the handling of the situation. But on that same night, they had Jose Carlos Ramirez versus Maurice Hooker on DAZN, and I was pretty happy with the fight. It was fun for the route that it went. The way I saw it was I had picked Ramirez from the get-go. I've actually never been that high on Maurice Hooker. I think he ended up turning out better than a lot of people predicted, especially at the Darlis Perez performance, where I think just about all of us thought that he lost the fight. He's developed his skill, right? He uses his height pretty well.
He got better.
Yeah, he's definitely gotten better. But Ramirez, he was out jabbing Hooker. He was getting inside. He was throwing combinations. And Hooker, I think, he got pulled into a firefight when he really shouldn't have engaged. He should have just kept on his bicycle, stuck on the jab, moved around. But I had Ramirez winning clearly. I know a lot of people had like 3-2 for Ramirez, but I thought Ramirez was in control the whole time. I thought he was dictating pace. He was dictating distance. He was the harder puncher. He was doing more damage. And I thought he was winning clearly up until a stoppage. And Ramirez, to his credit, as soon as he had Maurice Hooker hurt, jumped right on him and got the job done. I mean, that was pretty impressive stuff.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I agree. I thought – I just got to call out because on that night, I just thought Brian Kenny's commentary on DAZN was terrible for the reasons that you're stating.
And I like Brian.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times I've liked him too. It just, to me, bad night or whatever, or bias, because it was a DAZN guy fighting a top-ranked ESPN guy, and they crossed over. But, it was just, he just wasn't getting what was going on. You could see Ramirez had a strategy that, this guy can't hurt me. I'm going to put pressure on him and until he folds. And, all you had to do was listen to Robert Garcia in the corner, who was telling him, no respect. This guy can't hurt you. And that's the way it was going. And literally Brian Kenny,
perfect.
Maurice Hooker had not been a puncher in his career, knocked out Salcedo, but had not been a puncher throughout his career. And Brian Kenny was comparing him to Thomas Hearns. I mean, and you had Robert Garcia in the corner telling Ramirez, this guy can't hurt you. Just keep moving forward. No respect. And Brian Kenny is taking a guy who hasn't been a puncher his whole career, but just happened to recently score a big knockout, and comparing him to Thomas Hearns. And I'm thinking, do these guys, where do these guys get this analysis from?
How do we not have jobs?
When you see stuff like that, you start thinking about it because it's they got to remember that broadcasting is a communications business. You got to you should be able to talk and have coherent analysis that's accurate and things like that. And I just don't know what Brian Kenny was watching there, because there has been times I've liked him, but I thought that was just awful. It was annoying me because it was awful. And then the fight turned out, Ramirez just kept walking through him and he viciously got him out of there. And it was he just exploded, and the fight was stopped at the right time. But you could see, I think that really, I would just add, Jeremiah, that, Ramirez made Hooker fight that way. Hooker couldn't fight it was one of those fights where the pressure from Ramirez was so good that Hooker couldn't do anything else. And you could see he was, in between rounds, right before the round he got taken out, you could see he was running out of gas, and that was just from not from him not being in shape, but just from Ramirez putting too much pressure on him. And I think Ramirez is frankly the better fighter. As you pointed out, Hooker, Hooker was kind of had become an afterthought until he pulled the upset of Terry Flanagan. So, you got to kind of almost go back to that. I mean, this is a guy that was an afterthought a couple fights ago, and, he pulled an upset over Flanagan, then got the Salcedo knockout, and you got Brian King compared him to Thomas Hearns. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But good performance by Ramirez. I've been saying it, I'll say it again, because this is where the in-house fights aren't getting made. Why not have Ramirez fight Crawford? I mean, make that the fight. I'm
Right.
not saying he'll beat him, but, it's certainly a lot better than Top Rank's giving us. And we hear all these hand-wringing about Crawford's got nobody to fight because he can't fight the PBC guys. Have him fight Ramirez. I mean, forget all this junior division stuff. All these 140-pound guys have ended up fighting at 147 anyway. Make that fight. And if Ramirez loses to a guy as good as Crawford, it's not going to kill his career or anything. It's just ridiculous the way they don't put these fights together to me.
I know. Yeah, but unfortunately, fortunately, a lot of these people are still working within the modern, confines of the, the structure that we've got. There's 140 and there's 147. I mean, they can't make the jump. I mean, we know these guys are, we know they're draining themselves to make weight. It's not, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Anyway, speaking of good performance, do you think that Marcus Brown is going to have a good performance against Jean Pascal this coming weekend?
Well, he should. He's had the distractions with the criminal problems with the domestic violence, which is a shame, of course. If he did it for his, ex-girlfriend who's the victim, which we got to think of first. But, with that understood, I get, it's boxing and there's a lot of fighters in there. You're certainly not excusing these behaviors, but you do have a lot of people from rougher backgrounds, and obviously it's a combat sport. Again, it's not an excuse. It's just that you're going to get more of the stuff. And like you've said, there's no central governing body or things like that. And so with boxing, when he hasn't been convicted yet, almost kind of got to let it go. But it still does give me pause that then, the guy's fighting on Fox on national television. And I've loved Marcus Brown as a fighter. Listen to the show, I've been a big booster of him and picked him for the upset against Badu Jack, and he looked real strong, beat Badu Jack up bad. Pascal's durable, but, this is a fight where he could take a lot of shots. He's kind of got himself here in the sense of he pulled the upset of Al Bialy, who's limited but really is a legit huge puncher, and that was a surprise. And then, a surprise in the sense that he went the distance with Alvarez, he went the distance with Bivol, so you put him here, but he's past his best, and even though he's durable, I even get squeamish when we're talking about safety, and it doesn't mean he might not make it through the fight, but, there's two fights Saturday night on Fox, and I like PBC being on Fox, and these fights might have action, but they've got older guys involved who are overmatched, and I think when we're talking about safety, these might not be the best matchups, and Brown Pascal being one of them. I don't like this one for Pascal's safety too much here. He doesn't need to be taking these shots from Brown at this stage.
Absolutely agree, and I like Pascal. I mean, he's one of those guys who's put his time in. I mean, he's been in quality fights since, when he fought Carl Froch. What was that, back in 2000? Hell, I can't even remember. But, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's really put his work in. And at one juncture, he was the light heavyweight champion of the world, sorry. Right? Wasn't he when he?
Yeah, he's a lineal.
Who is it?
Lineal light heavyweight champion of the world. Which, we know how few legit lineal champions we're getting in the traditional divisions nowadays. So there's no doubt he achieved that. And when I was thinking, Pascal, he's got his limitations and stuff, and he got stopped by Kovalev. In terms of viability, he's had this mini revival where he beat El Bialy by stoppage, and then he went the distance with Alvarez and Bivol, who are top guys, but again, and Brown's a top guy, so they're putting him in here kind of based on that, but, not that people ask for it, but it's just one of those fights that I'm just kind of squeamish about. Brown should beat him up really, and that's not necessarily a good thing because Pascal does have some durability, so he could hang in there for a while and be taking some shots, but he should be taking a beating here.
Yeah, I agree, but of course, it's one of those games where if a guy wants to keep going, especially somebody like Pascal who still shows that he's got something left. A lot of times they just roll out the red carpet, and they're just victims of them constantly fighting, and it's unfortunate. Again, I like Pascal. Hopefully nothing serious happens, but he's one to watch. I mean, because it's not just the loads of professional fights that he's been in. It's also all the sparring that goes with it. I mean, tons of fighters will tell you that the most damage or the biggest wars that they were in the gym. I mean, it happens time and time again. And, as I talked about with the headgear, sometimes it gives you a false sense of security, and you're willing to take more punches. But, Pascal's a naturally tough guy. He's got a good chin. I mean, it took a while for somebody like Kovalev to break him down, but hopefully he comes out okay. Yeah, but I'm also hoping that Brown does him a favor and gets him out as early as possible. I mean, Pascal is a tough guy, but Brown, as talented as he is, has a tendency sometimes to shell up a little bit and just use his boxing ability and go to a decision. I'm hoping this ends early.
Yeah, I mean, Brown does do that. Brown does do that at times, and that's a possibility because Pascal can take a shot. Yeah, and Pascal can take a shot, so it could happen. I mean, it might be somewhat entertaining, of a fight, even though there shouldn't be any doubt that Brown wins it. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it is still boxing. We're still at the point the guys are choosing to do it. I mean, there is that factor. So you hope Pascal, comes out okay here. But I do like Brown's abilities. I hope he gets together outside of the ring, and if he shows his talent here on Fox. But it's certainly a fight he should win, and I would think he should win this one by stoppage.
Yeah, I agree. And last, we're going to go with Kownacki versus Arreola. Stylistically, it looks as if there might be some intrigue there. My issue is that Chris Arreola hasn't really had a significant win. And, well, I mean, I don't know if he's ever had a significant win, but he's had a few handouts from the WBC. To me, Kownacki should blow him away while Arreola puts up a little bit of a fight. I don't personally have much high hope for Arreola here. Again, I've never been that high on him. I mean, he should have more losses than, his record indicates. I thought he lost to, Fred Cassie. He's just not that good of a fighter, in my opinion. And I expect Kownacki to get him out of here fairly early.
Yeah, the closer this one's got, that's the way I see it going. I mean, Arreola will throw punches, and even though he doesn't have the classic look of it, because he was a light heavyweight in the amateurs, people, I think, always forget that about him. Because you'll see these spurts of combination punching talent from him, and he just doesn't look the part. And that's what it is. I mean, the guy was, the guy had amateur pedigree, as a light heavyweight. We know what he's been weighing in that heavyweight in his pro career. And he was off. He had one win against a guy that was undefeated, but if you look at the fight, the guy looked like he had nothing on the significant pro level, and he got a knockout. Arreola is going to throw punches. So, when you saw this matchup, you're like, well, I was thinking at first even too, maybe entertainment factor, but the closer the fight's getting and when I think about it, Arreola has lost his punch resistance too. And, he got dropped by Travis Kaufman. I mean, Kownacki's probably not your biggest punching heavy, but he's not your lightest punching heavyweight either. And he throws a lot of punches, and he comes in at, 260 pounds. The closer this fight's getting, like I was talking about Pascal, but I think it's worse. It's worse for Arreola, frankly, because he takes more clean shots than Pascal, and he's lost his punch resistance more than Pascal. And I just think, like, like you are now. I just think that, Ariel is always so open that, it might be entertaining for a round or 2 rounds where Ariel is just trying to throw something back, but he's going to get hit with some hammers from Konatsky, who will punch in combination too. And I it's another one of those. I just hope Ariola doesn't get hurt here. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to get at that point, but he's 37 years old. He's taken a lot of shots. His punch resistance down. He's wide open. He has no defense. And Konatsky is going to hit you and hit you a lot. And he's a heavy guy.
Yep.
He throws a lot of punches, and this could be a vicious knockout. I just hope Ariola doesn't get hurt too bad here.
Yeah, me too. And actually, if this was Chris Ariola of 10 years ago, or what 7-8 years ago, around the Vitaly Klitschko, this would be a pretty fun. I would still favor Kownacki. Honestly, stylistically, Kownacki reminds me a bit of Chris Ariola, and I think that's where a lot of people, get the fun factor from. There's some similarities in their style, but Kownacki, to me, even though he hasn't really, he's not going to get a shot at somebody like Vitaly Klitschko or, some of the other guys that Ariola was able to fight. But Ariola was really never that competitive. And I think maybe he was slightly competitive in the first Stiverne fight, though that match is kind of, it's a bit fuzzy to me. Again, I've never been high on Chris Ariola, so that one's a bit fuzzy to me. But I know he got his butt whipped against Stiverne in the rematch. Ariola has never really been on that sort of level. Kownacki strikes me as being better than Ariola ever was. But again, we got to wait and see what Kownacki ultimately does before I can make a firm judgment. But Kownacki I think he should run through him. And I don't hate the fight. I mean, it doesn't really show much. In fact, I think the Gerald Washington fight, after Washington's latest win, I think shows me more than whatever this fight will amount to. But Kownacki's waiting in the wings. It seems like he's going to get his shot soon enough against one of these guys. And it seems like with Deontay Wilder running out of potential, choice of opponents, he might be moved up here. Maybe right after the Fury fight, and then he has to whatever. But it seems like he's just biding his time now. So it just kind of makes sense that he's fighting guys like this. So I wouldn't mind seeing him in against, somebody rated in the top 10, get a better feel for what he's got. That would be cool. But I guess we'll wait and see what plays out. You have any final words, John?
Yeah, just final words. I agree in the sense, we've made this on the show, but this is the one I think when you look at the overall depth. Even though, some of the guys are flawed and everything. I think you're right about, Konatsky compared to Ariola, 7-8 years ago, even though they have similarities, that, he's just better because, I think outside of the 2 Klitschkos, Povetkin was competent, but, and had some amateur pedigree, but, it was just such a bad heavyweight era. And that's why you saw Ariola keep popping up. He's a perfect example. That I agree with you. I think even your best Ariola, even though he might be in some good fights, is probably not good as some of these guys now because there is still some better heavyweight depth. I mean, the division I think has improved, even though it can be criticized. It's improved, and I think that's an example. And I think, I just saw, I think it was either today or yesterday that now, Deontay Wilder is going to be on the commentary, Saturday night, for this fight. So, I mean, he may get, the way boxing is now with the politics, who knows? Konatsky might even be in there next after Ortiz. They're saying Fury, but we know how this stuff goes. So, Konatsky's getting a Fox slot. That's for a reason as the headliner. So, they're going to look at that rating. I mean, Andy Ruiz was involved in a solid rating, even though he wasn't the headliner in his fight against Dmitrienko. And next thing you know, he was in with Anthony Joshua, at least in part as a result of that. So, what I'm saying is, I don't know what the number would be, but if Konatsky draws 1.5 million or 2 million see him or something like that, maybe it's going to be more like a 1.5 in the summer. But hey, that's a lot more than other people are getting seen nowadays. So it's the type of thing that could lead you into a Wilder fight.
Yep, you never know. Wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, I don't think I know we've been boxing fans for a long time, so there's not much that surprises us anymore. I mean, you never know sometimes. I mean, there's been so many twists and turns, and my final word is kind of about the twists and turns. I mean, Canelo Alvarez, his name has been dominating the headlines for what feels like months on end now, and that's cool. He's the biggest moneymaker in the sport. And now, after, again, these twists and turns, it's been a damn windy road. I mean, it seems like, hey, maybe we're getting a third Golovkin fight. Well, maybe Kovalev's on the radar now. It seems as if we may get now, and it's for some, silly alphabet trinkets and, forget the thing, but it's part of the decision. It's part of the storyline. I guess one of the alphabet soup organizations has decided to take their belt away from Canelo Alvarez, and they are going to sanction a Gennady Golovkin, Sergey Derevyanchenko fight. I'm not sure if there's a date involved, but I saw it from Keith Idec, who is a source I think both of us trust.
Yeah, he's credible.
Yeah, it seems like Canelo Alvarez may be fighting. He may be fighting Demetrius Andrade, and then we may have Golovkin, Derevyanchenko. And honestly, I can't complain a whole lot about that. I'd much rather see. I know there are a lot of people. Again, I went over this when we talked about this a number of times. I would much rather see Golovkin Alvarez 3 than Andrade and against Canelo Alvarez. And I know a lot of people are like, hey, well, what about the unifications and this quote unquote undisputed middleweight championship? Listen, man, Canelo is the champ. Whether he's got one of the alphabet belts or all of them, it doesn't matter. He's the man. So whether or not he's missing one, frankly, means squat to me. He's the guy. So Andrade doesn't provide that much for me. He doesn't provide that much for DAZN. That's why, he wasn't a potential target initially. But since Kovalev seems to have fallen short, Alvarez seems to hate Gennady Golovkin, I guess we are getting the Andrade fights, and I think those are two solid matchups. They're not ideal, but you could argue that Derevyanchenko is number 3 at middleweight, or yeah, I think you could argue that he's number 3 because, Daniel Jacobs is moving up to 168, so you'd have Alvarez, Golovkin, Derevyanchenko, and then I think Andrade, and then maybe Charlo. Oddly, the Ring magazine had Rob Brandt at number 3 before the Murata fight. I thought that was an odd placement, to be honest with you. And I don't always look at their rankings, but again, I think that was odd, and I think it was kind of just worth pointing out quickly. But I think besides, I think when you evaluate the rankings, I think that it's actually rock solid, though not ideal, that Golovkin would be fighting arguably the number 3 guy, and Alvarez would be fighting the number 4 guy, or however you want to rate them. So I don't have a big problem with it. I'd rather see something else.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I trust Keith Idec. There's only a few guys that I'll look at as totally credible and who've got the inside contacts and everything, and he's one of them. And a lot of them would be guys, frankly, that were credible newspaper writers at one time, which he's one of them. So yeah, I mean, I saw that too late in the day, and I'm with you though too. It's like, it's hard, I guess, on paper to say it's bad because you're right where you look at where the guys actually stack up, but it's playing out bizarre to me. I mean, I'm with you. I mean, it's clear that Canelo's the champ. I don't understand how people get caught up in this alphabet soup stuff and care what the IBF's going to say, or that Andrade's got this WBL belt that he got versus this Avakov guy. I mean, who's going to consider that credible title fight? I mean, why would you? It doesn't make any sense after, when Canelo and Golovkin were fighting. I mean, it's just not logical. And, Andrade's a good fighter. He's undefeated, but, Derevyanchenko's solid. I've liked him, but I am with you. I just don't see this people with this. I don't want to see the Canelo Golovkin 3, and I'm not saying I have evidence that it's not this, but I don't think these people necessarily have evidence that it is either, because they don't have any direct quotes or anything like that. Like, I'm starting to almost wonder, the storyline has been, well, Canelo just doesn't like Golovkin, so he doesn't want to fight him again. I mean, I don't have any evidence that that's not it, but I haven't seen any solid evidence that it is either, and DAZN's involved, and I'm like, and this is boxing, and we know how promoters are and TV networks. In other words, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm like trying to think like, why would they maybe, is there some reason they're trying to hold off the Canelo Golovkin 3? Because
right.
I'll give we could go on forever. I don't want to go on forever, but I'll give you like a little bit of a comparable thing this week, even though there were quotes on this and there haven't direct quotes from Canelo. Like all of a sudden, Teofimo Lopez now is talking that there's not going to be a Comey fight in the fall. And,
right.
and everybody's talking about Teofimo saying it, and I'm thinking to myself, and I think I'm justified in thinking this, I'm like, is that Teofimo talking or is that Bob Arum talking behind his back? You know what I mean? In other words, and that's what I'm thinking, like, I can't put my finger on what the players would get out of it, but I'm like, why isn't Canelo, I'm just not sure I'm buying that Canelo Golovkin 3 is not happening just because Canelo Alvarez doesn't want to. He already gave him 2 paydays, you know what I mean? I mean, he's going to draw the line now at a third. I mean, it just, something to me here doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's like he'd be shorting himself millions of dollars without it. I mean, that's the biggest fight monetarily in boxing, especially after Joshua got knocked off by Ruiz. Right. I mean, it just doesn't seem to add up. I mean, do they want to wait until next year and get him then? I mean, because I was hearing all this stuff like, Golovkin, if they approve Derevyanchenko for Alvarez, they have to approve a third fight with Golovkin. I mean, there's been so much information that's been put out there, and that's why I don't get caught up. I don't get too caught up in a lot of what's being said because, as I mentioned, I think the last time that we were on air together, I think some of these guys, I think they're being fed shit information and they're just putting it out there because that's their MO. They're known as the guys who are like putting out the sources. Right. And a lot of the times, it doesn't amount to much. I mean, and these managers or whoever these sources are could very well be manipulating these people. I mean, there's a lot going on behind the closed doors that we never know about, but it just seems odd. I mean, it just seems odd that, the fight doesn't seem to be in hand, but you never know with Golden Boy. I mean, right after the Andrade fight, if that actually takes place, they might say, okay, well, Golovkin's next, and that will be that.
Right. I mean, we can wrap it up, but right, one theory I do have along those lines, and again, I don't have any evidence of this. It'd be just, circumstantial, but it might make some sense to me, would be, with whatever DAZN's behind-the-scenes numbers are, that they really can't afford to give you 2 quote-unquote pay-per-view quality fights a year without it being actually pay-per-view, that they can give you 1, and that was Jacobs Golovkin, and they can't give you another. And they can't give you – I mean, that to me would make some sense. Yeah. They can't give you 2 in the calendar year. They're talking this stuff up, but, that'll be the one for next year, and that's all they can afford to give you. In other words, they without going to straight pay-per-view, they can give you 1 of those a year, but they can't give you 2. That would maybe make a little bit of sense to me.
Yeah, maybe, but you would think with Golovkin and how much viewership that would attract, maybe the subscribership would do them justice. But again, there's tons of stuff that goes on behind closed doors that you and I will never know about. And
I really don't know the answer on this one.
We're both in the dark, and we're going to be in the dark until something concrete happens. And a lot of times that's the best way to go about it because boxing, like I mentioned, there's just so much stuff being thrown around, and because of the rate at which things move, there's a lot of gossip that goes on in between fights.
I know.
But with that, we're going to wrap that up. Yeah, we're going to wrap that up though. This has been a pretty long episode, but whenever you get John and I together and, I roll out the red carpet for him, he's a good talker,
That's right. I could go on. I could keep going. So you're right.
Yeah.
And you make a good point about the gaps. You make a real good point that the gaps in between fights lead to a lot of gossip because there is a lot of boxing gossip out there every day for how spread out the fights are. And you can just go on about it.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of it, but, like I said, we're going to wrap that up. As always, we're brought to you by BetNow and the Retired Boxers Foundation. So for John Einrenhofer, I'm Jeremiah Pricer. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth. Have a good night.